Hello and welcome to FSC Fieldwork Live 2020. Today we're going to be investigating place, so thank you for joining me. Just a little notice to start. We've got about a 45-minute lesson, but as I'm sure you've heard, at 11 o'clock there's going to be a minute's silence today, just to take some time to reflect on the work of the NHS and key workers. So bear that in mind and don't be surprised when that comes up in the middle. Now, people are joining us from all over the world today, which is very exciting. We've got from Italy, the UAE, India, Kenya. It's really amazing to have you all with us, so welcome to you as well. I'm Charlie, and behind the camera today, I've got with me Tim, my husband, so it's okay, we're sticking with the social distancing rules, and we're here today in Suffolk. Now, obviously, ideally, you'd have been joining us out in the field in Dedham. But due to the restrictions with coronavirus that are keeping us all safe, we're just going to do the best we can today from my street here. And as a field tutor, generally, I don't mind standing out in the rain to do field work. Unfortunately, I don't usually take my laptop and all my paperwork with me. So we also have just come inside. So we'll do our best that we can with the resources we've got. Now, as there are so many of you joining us, I've got a few shout outs to do to welcome everyone. So good morning to the Wellington School Advanced Higher Pupils from Ayr, and that's from Mr. Leddingham. Shout out to all the geographers for working so hard in the last month. Miss Waltham is so pleased with your motivation and cannot wait to teach you again. That's Woodhouse College. A big hello to all the students from Thomas Telford School, St Bart's in Newbury, the trainee teachers at Middlesex University, the Spires College Torquay, and Oscar from Anglesey. Welcome to you all, guys. We've even had some last minute sort of shout outs just come through directly. So the Dream Team, Year 12s at the Compton School, hello and welcome to you too. Okay, so yeah, welcome everyone. Today we'll be looking at the concept of place and investigating. There should be a little reminder coming up on your screen about now. Investigating how a location is experienced and perceived by different people. Okay, we're going to be doing a range of methods today to support the research we've already done in our pre-session work, and we're going to be doing a place check, non-participant observations, some motion mapping, and also extending that a little bit with survey 123, which will be good. And if you have your handouts ready and a pen handy, then you can work through all of that with us as we go. Okay. Now, thank you so much to those of you who have already submitted some questions in the pre-course. I'll do my best to try and answer those as we go through, so sort of towards the end of the session. But it's not too late to get involved, and it would be really lovely to have lots of interaction as our kind of global classroom. To do that, if you're watching on YouTube, you should be able to see like the chat down the side of your video. If you can't, maybe refresh it and that should come up. So if you have a YouTube account, you can put some comments or questions in on there. If not, I think they're still submitting questions on the Encounter Edu website as well, so that's an option for you. And as I say, we're really treating this as our global classroom. So if you think about the type of comments that would be appropriate to use in the classroom, hopefully you had enough opportunity in the 10 minutes before this to say hi to all your friends. I know it's been such a long time since you've been in the classroom, but that means that now we can really concentrate on the lesson and make sure that all our comments are appropriate to the work that we're doing. Otherwise, it's really distracting having lots of comments going by on the chat that aren't relevant. So I've got my teacher moderators to help me with that today. We've got Janine and Marianne, and yeah, they'll be keeping an eye on those comments and helping me to answer some of the questions as well. Okay, so if you do miss a part of the lesson today, or you just want to spend more time on something, or actually you just really want to get involved in this kind of community we've got right here for the next 45 minutes, and you want to spend some time on the chat, then that's fine, because this session will be available on catch up. If you wait about an hour after the session, that should be up there, so you can go through it at your own pace. Okay, so guys, that's pretty much the housekeeping out of the way, I think. I really hope you've enjoyed your research into this concept of place, location with meaning. In the pre-course, we have studied the three main approaches to place. So we've got the descriptive approach, the social constructivist, and the phenomenological approaches to place. And we've applied those to Dedham to start to explore this location. We've used some formal census data. You had that on your story map. We've kind of explored the social construct of Dedham as Constable country by looking at some of the beautiful works by John Constable. And also through Gilbert's 8-way thinking, we had a go at applying your own perceptions or finding your own perceptions of the area. And actually, it'd be really great if on the chat now, you could put in some comments of what are your perceptions of Dedham at this stage of the investigation before we go out and get some of our primary data about it. They'll come through to me if you put them up there, and we can share our ideas. Obviously, at this point, just while you do that, I'll chat about the risk assessment. So normally we'd be heading out now into Dedham. At the end of your story map, there was a bit about the risk assessment and the ethical considerations you should put into place when you're doing any piece of sort of urban fieldwork. So that's worth bearing in mind. But obviously, because of the restrictions for coronavirus, and no one from the FSC lives in Dedham, although it is pretty close to one of our centres, FSC Flatford Mill, unfortunately we can't be out there today. But actually, you know what, that's not such a bad thing, because this is a really good demonstration of how all the methods that we're going through today can really be applied in any location. So as you're progressing from GCSE to A-level, or maybe you're already studying in your A-levels, you can kind of add these techniques to your toolkit and maybe draw on them as you move into your studies of your own places. Oh, excellent. So we do have some student views coming through. Shout out, hi to all students at Stockport Grammar and Mrs. Miles. I don't know whether you've put these ideas forward, guys, or if other people have, but they've suggested it's a rural village, historical, calm, traditionally British, green. It's certainly that. Yeah. So we're getting those kind of ideas so far in terms of our perceptions of this place. And now we have the opportunity to gather some primary data to see if we can support those original kind of perceptions or explore how different people will think of those in different ways. Okay. Now, when we start a geographical investigation, one of the initial thoughts that we need to have is about basically why bother to study it? Why bother to study place? What is that bigger picture or geographical context that's going to give reason or give meaning to our study? Also, we could consider why Dedham specifically, and I know some of you asked about that. In the pre-course, you were asked right at the end after your story map to consider why we have chosen Dedham as our study location. And I mean, there are loads of reasons. So it doesn't really matter what you've put. It's not a case of right or wrong, but we'll go through some of the ideas you might have considered. You might have started quite practically. So Dedham is, to me, a well-known place. It's somewhere where, in normal circumstances, I'd be going out with students every week to study there. So I have loads of information and background secondary data that can support our study. And I also know it well. So, you know, I know what's going on there. Well, that's a bit like saying you would be choosing a place that is close or accessible to you. If you know it well, you're likely to know what's important there, as I say, what makes it a special or unique place. And you'll be more easily able to access all the areas at all times. So you'll get a really representative spatial where you go and temporal when you go sample across the area. Some of your reasons, though, about why study place, why study Dedham, might be more geographical. So one of the main, well, actually the main economic function of Dedham is tourism. And for stakeholders such as the council, any tourist-focused businesses, the AONB, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, you'll remember, it's really useful to them to know whether people's perceptions and experiences of that area match the social construct of Constable country, and they can manage the area better with the information from this sort of research to make sure that it does. They want people to obviously enjoy their experience in Dedham. And equally, it has wider meaning. So Constable country is part of our wider heritage and kind of culture. We do get people from all over the world coming to this kind of rural spot in Suffolk, on the border of Suffolk and Essex, to enjoy it. That means, like other iconic places, like Olympic Park or Glastonbury, we're likely to have more background information about it rather than just, you know, your average rural idyllic village. So that can make our study much more meaningful and substantial. Also, it means that, yeah, a wider group of society will be interested in the outcomes of this research. Okay, so it'll have wider meaning, wider value. Not to mention, of course, that actually just studying place in general is really important because of the depth and nature of our connection to place. It plays a big part in our lives. So, for example, councils, planners, even individual agents that are shaping a place, maybe through a regeneration sort of project, something like that, they would really want to know what's going on in an area and use this sort of research in order to make a place the best it can be for our communities. Okay, so you should be back to seeing a view of our street now. Hopefully that's okay. And I'll just remind you of our aim there. So what we're trying to do today is we are looking at the investigation and looking at how it's experienced and perceived by different people. So who are these different people we're talking about? Well, ideally, all users of an area. So we're thinking about local residents, visitors, all across the demographic structure and different ethnicities, working people, families, everyone who uses the area. And then we want to go on and look at, or measure, if you like, their thoughts and perceptions and their experiences. And that is no easy task. So what we're going to do today is go through 3 methods. They're qualitative methods. And you will, I'm sure, have used qualitative data before, field sketches, annotated photos, questionnaires, they all count. But we're going to be doing 3 methods today that are maybe slightly new to you. So on that note, if you're excited about these new methods and you want to look a bit more into them, this guide, which is the Creative Fieldwork Guide, is available. Hopefully you can see that there, that's it. It's available on our website. If you go to fieldwork.live, there are links there to all our kind of publications. And yeah, everything we're doing today is in here, as well as a lot more besides. Okay, so that's a really good, useful resource if you're interested in that sort of thing. Now, as I say, our first method today then is non-participant observations. Okay, so hopefully you have your handout with you. We're looking at page 1 now. And as we go through our methods, what it's really important to establish is why are they valid, fit for purpose, how does the data really help us to understand our investigation? And I'll also just flag up now, although I'll talk about it a lot more in depth in a moment, is there are little evaluation tables on the back of each sheet. So do be thinking about our critical approach to geography and what are the pros and cons or the justifications and limitations to our studies as we go through. Okay, so first then, why is this valid? Well, what we're doing in a non-participant observation is we're passively observing. That means we're not taking part in the actions out in the street there. We're watching what's going on, and we're watching people's behaviour and experience of the area to tell us whether they perhaps have a positive experience of that place or a positive perception or negative. So, for example, people might be going along and having a chat, probably not at the moment, obviously, and that might be showing quite a good sense of community. Or maybe it's good for their well-being. They might be sort of walking their dog or going for a run in the area. It's quite a positive association that they'd have with that place. It doesn't have to be, obviously, good on a personal level. Maybe for business, they might be walking through in quite a determined way. But they're using the facilities in that area. So that would still make that a meaningful experience to them. So, a meaningful place. Something that's maybe quite counterintuitive, but is also really useful in a non-participant observation is trying to look for who's missing. So what have we got here? Some of the comments you've said of what your perceptions already are of Dedham, things like an older population, quintessentially English, a chocolate box village. Well, maybe for some people that might not really appeal to them. So maybe young people might feel not excluded from the area, but feel like there's nothing for them there. So watching out for who's missing can also really tell us about the geographies of this place. If you can manage that, that'd be great. So just coming up on your screen now, in case you don't have the handout, should be a little clip of the handout for non-participant observation. And you'll see there that in the first column, we're looking for people's use and experience of place, so their appearance, clothing, age, physical behaviour, their interactions with others. We'll just point out it does go onto the other side of the sheet as well, so be aware of that. In the second column, we've got a few descriptions of the sorts of things you might be looking for. That's just to kind of scaffold you in case it's the first time you've used this technique. And obviously your observations go in that final column there. Okay. Now it's not much use looking out at my street, of course, because not a lot is going on, to be honest, and it's not Dedham. So when you come to do this method, you will get a picture of Dedham coming up on your screen, okay? And that'll be a picture of the village centre where kind of the commercial bits are. So there's people queuing outside the co-op there, for example. Or, of course, you could do any of these techniques for your own place. And actually, if your teachers are attending the post-course webinar, the live webinar afterwards, then that would be, I'll tell you more about that in a second, don't worry, then that would be good for you to have that data of your own place as well. So for any of the methods, feel free to do either Dedham or your own place if you've got a nice view there to look out from, if you've got somewhere from where you're studying. So I'm going to hand over to you in a moment to have a go at this first technique. But just a little note. In the observations, you're going to have to make a decision between whether you're looking at reliability or precision. So you might take a look out and think, oh, okay, well, I'll just try and write down everything that's going on, which is fine. You'd have a really reliable data set. You'd have everything included there, but you might lack some detail. So you'd be lacking the precision. Equally, you might just focus on a few key things you notice and write down in great detail. So you'd have really precise data, but probably not that reliable. You'd miss something. So that's just a decision you have to make, and that's okay. You can justify it, and that as long as you justify your approach and the impact it has on your conclusions, that's no problem. But could you think of any ways to overcome that? Maybe you could photograph it or film it as you go, and then add in details later. If you do that, though, just make sure in terms of ethical considerations, you are keeping that film space, because you then have people's data sort of with you. So bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to you for about a minute to have a go at filling out that section. Okay, over to you. Hopefully you can see the picture of Dedham now. Okay, I'm not going to interrupt. You've still got time, don't worry. I'm just going to remind you, remember that chat box is there, and it'd be great if for about the next minute or just under, you could put down in the chat box any limitations you've noticed while you've been filling that bit out. Remember, it's available on catch up, so don't worry if you don't finish the method. Take part in that in our sort of global classroom and get involved if you can. Okay, so if you want to finish off your writing there, that picture will be disappearing. Okay, so some limitations might come up on my screen. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we've got one. So one limitation someone suggested is that it's quite difficult to tell the ages of people. You're absolutely right, and that's also not the only thing it's difficult to tell, is it? Because it's our sort of subjective interpretation of what we're seeing, some factors, like ages, might be quite an unreliable assessment of what's going on. Maybe people look like they're having a nice chat, but actually they've never met before, and they're just asking for directions or something. So yeah, it can be elements of unreliability in there because of this nature as a subjective interpretation. Equally, if we think people aren't really enjoying the area, well, definitely today, if we just take a step back, well, it's pretty wet. It's not as warm as it has been, so people are probably rushing through the area. So in both those cases, we could read too much into our interpretation, sort of going from just a nice chat to a community atmosphere, or people rushing through suggesting that people don't like that space, they have a negative experience of it. So how can we overcome that then? Well, we should definitely consider the sampling approach that we take to get a representative sample. So this might be in terms of a temporal sample when we get that data. So you've obviously said about the weather, pretty rubbish at the moment. And obviously if we were doing it now, and actually the photo you were looking at was also taken at about 11 o'clock in lockdown. We might be missing working age people because they're at work. School people would be at school, or school-age children would be at school. So we should make sure we sample maybe on different days of the week or through the day so that we can capture that. Equally, just doing it in one location is not giving us a representative overview of the whole area and people's experience of the whole place or location. So maybe a systematic sample every 200 meters down the road, that would give us much better coverage and representation of the space. Okay, now I'm just going to give you 30 more seconds. Up on your screen about now should be coming an example of the evaluation table. Again, just in case you don't have your handout to hand. And yeah, I'll give you a few more seconds to fill out those points. Looking at your limitations in the field when you're actually getting the data is the best way by far to get that information, because it's fresh in your mind, you're experiencing it as you go. And what's really important is recognizing the limitations and considering how they impact the quality of our conclusions. So to what extent are we able to trust our conclusions in light of these limitations? So it's a really important part of your geographical studies as you move into A-level. Okay, so hopefully that's long enough for you to note that down. Remember, you can always watch back. Thank you for taking part, by the way, those of you who have done. I can see what's going on. Oh, we have another hello. Hello to Year 12 from Portsmouth Grammar School. Thank you for joining us today. So, on to the place check then, our next method. This is valid because in this one, we're actually looking at the characteristics of the place that shape people's perceptions and experience. It's a bit like interviewing the streets, if you like, or interviewing the place. And this means the data from this method or this data collection will justify why people experience and perceive this place in different ways. Okay, so that's a really good data set to have. You should be able to see that on your screen now, just a reminder. And essentially in that first column there, we've got what makes this place, so different features that you need to look out for. And in the second column, you've got your notes and evidence again. Okay, so if you just flip back to My Street again, and we can have a look at My Street out in the area, hopefully you see it past me. Let's just have a go at thinking what we might put down there. Okay, so these houses behind me, we've got sort of the terraces and the detached villas. They were built at a time when in this town, the silk and the brick industries were really coming to their height. So the town was becoming a lot more affluent. And not so much on these houses, but a bit further down the road, on the second floor, they have enlarged windows so that the silk weavers that would have used that as their workshop can get lots of light in. Now that kind of architectural style, or the history and the link between our architecture and our heritage, is something that local people here feel is really part of that sense of place and a sense of identity of what our town is. So I would put that sort of thing in what makes this place special or unique. Okay, I could write about that sort of thing there. Equally, something that you can observe without knowing any background to a place, there's so much green space here, really well-maintained gardens, that make it a pleasant place to be in. So what I want you to try and do in this evidence bit is think about those knock-on connections, those positive connections, thinking geographically. So with those gardens, probably have a good impact on health because people have space to exercise. Equally, if you're walking down the street, it'll be a pleasant experience. It'll kind of create that sense of community and pride in the area. And the knock-on impact of that might be that actually we see less crime in terms of antisocial behaviour in the area because people have that pride. So do try and think in depth about how we can say what impact this evidence has on people's experience and perception. It doesn't have to be positive. So, for example, the steps up to these houses here, well, that could be quite difficult to access for some people. So maybe elderly people might have a different perception of the place to younger people. Okay, again, guys, I'm going to give you about a minute to have a go at putting your information in there, and then a little reminder halfway through for putting in those limitations. Okay, so I'll hand over to you for a moment. You should be able to see the Dedham picture coming up now, and obviously you can do it about your own place if you want, but this Dedham picture is the end of the high street, so you can see some Georgian houses there and some of the parking, street parking in front of them. So guys, if you can, and if you're noticing any limitations as you're working through this method, do please put those up on the chat box and they can come through to me, but I'll give you about another minute. If you want to finish off what you're writing there, we'll return to my street here. And on page 4, you can find the evaluation table for the place check. So yeah, we've got a few limitations coming through. Thank you so much for taking part. We've got an idea there that some things might be quite subjective. So yeah, I definitely agree some things are. On the plus side, the pro side, we've got actually it could be quite reliable. So it'll be an accurate, which means true, kind of true data, an accurate representation of this place because some observations will be reliable. For example, the objective observations, like whether it's a green space, that would be easy to record and to observe. But in other ways, it's definitely subjective, absolutely, which is sort of our interpretation of what's special or what's unique. And actually that would be a real limitation. It could be quite an unreliable observation if you hadn't done any background research. Like if I didn't live here, I wouldn't know anything about the silk weavers, for example. So you do need to have a lot of background knowledge of that. And again, it could be important for background knowledge for evaluating the age of buildings. Some people are putting that in there, which requires your prior knowledge. Absolutely. Equally, it's just a snapshot. So we're not really seeing, it would be quite hard to establish things like how is waste handled? You know, if it's not bin day and you're not seeing any evidence, or in your location, you're not seeing any evidence of how waste is handled, you're not going to be able to record that in a reliable way. So do make sure you've got those down there, guys. Okay. I think I've probably got time just before 11 o'clock to talk about the sampling. So in order to overcome that, again, coming back to our temporal sampling, if we could record this multiple times over a week, we'd maybe get a better idea of what's going on in this place. So we'd have much more reliable sections. And it might be that some of these are reliable data sets and some of the other sections are just less reliable because of the nature of the subjective observations. And you know, that's okay. Again, if you record those limitations, it means you can say what impact they have on your conclusions. Okay. So if you've got those down, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. So still 30 seconds. Okay, sorry, just trying to negotiate this with my producers backstage. You sort out your worksheets, guys. Move on to the emotion mapping and make sure you've got that handy. You'll need page 5 and 6, and we'll be looking at the mood graph on page 6 first of all. Okay, so just prepare yourselves before we go into this talk. So with the rest of the country, we're going to be joining in this minute silence. And that will enable us just to reflect for a moment on the work that's being done by the really caring people in the NHS, but also other key workers as well. So bus drivers, people working in the shops. Thank you. Okay, thank you for joining me with that, ladies and gentlemen. So if we move on now to our next method, which is emotion mapping. Now, why is this valid? Well, here we're really moving on to that phenomenological approach and thinking about how a place and the features in it really shape our perception, our emotion of it. Okay, so this is a really important data set and considering those different people. So if you, just coming up on your screen at the moment, or if you look at page 6 of your handout, you should be able to see the mood graph, okay? This is developed by Yale University, and it's a really common way now, really popular way of assessing mood in an area. If you look along the x-axis, you'll see that it goes from negative to positive, and from low to high energy on the y-axis. And essentially what we're doing is categorizing our mood into one of the sections, okay? One of those 64 words that are on there. Now, why are we doing this? Well, obviously, emotion is inherently subjective, and that's okay. We want that data. We want to know what people think of the area. But if we were to just ask people how they felt and they could say any word they wanted, although it would be incredibly precise, they'd be able to say their exact emotion. When you came to analyze it, you'd have so much data. It would be really hard to work with. So in fact, you'd probably end up coding it anyway, which means essentially putting it into themes. And if you're interested, there's more on that in the post-course webinar a bit later on. As I say, I'll tell you about those soon. So as you're going to lose that element of precision anyway, it's good to get a really reliable data set from the outset. So to kind of try and overcome some of this subjectivity, we're going to use this method to be more reliable. Although, of course, there is still that element of subjectivity where someone's idea of relax might be different to someone else's, but we'll go with it. So if you just take a look back here in My Street, and I'll give you an example of how you might use it. At the moment, I would say I feel at ease. You know, I'm familiar with the area. It's not a great day, so it's not more positive. So if I find at ease, I'll notice that it's green 2. Okay, and that's how we record the data for our emotion mapping. On page 5 of your sheet, you'll see in the table there, your emotion for your fieldwork site, I would put green 2. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to have a go at doing your own example, both for your fieldwork site, if you want to use mine, you can, or your own view out the window, and one for Dedham as well. So we'll put the place check picture back up just so you can remind yourselves. But if you wanted to use the story map or Google Street View to do one for Dedham, feel free, that's fine. And again, if you could put any limitations in the box, I will share those back. That would be great. Just to sort of add to the robustness of our data, I would say try to separate how you're feeling at the moment, maybe you might be cold or hungry or something, to actually how does the place make you feel? I'll give you a minute to do that. half the time there, guys. Do share your limitations if you can with the rest of the class. And let's consider some of those justifications and limitations, shall we? So obviously we've talked about validity first and how we can make it a reliable data set using this mood mapping or the mood graph. What about limitations? Got some questions coming through, which is great. I will, well, actually, this one's quite relevant to the study. So maybe it's a question from Attlework Academy here. So I will address that one in just a moment. Well, one thing we might notice is actually, obviously, this is just one opinion in one place. So we're not doing too great on considering the perceptions of different people. So we need to consider our sampling. Maybe we could use a random number generator and select random people going along, or a systematic sample, and we could ask, say, every third or fifth person that comes along the street and so on. Okay, that way we'd be likely to get a good cross-section of the users of the area. So that'd be great. However, what if it's different across different areas of the place? So what we can also do is combine that spatial sampling with how we sample the people we ask. And on my map here, which hopefully you can see, I've stratified my sample. So I've split the area into categories, and I've considered the main commercial area and then the tourist hotspots. So up here, we've got the riverside where lots of tourists gather to use the boats. And over in the Dedham Vale, that's kind of the more natural area of Constable Country. So if I can make a representative sample of all those and the people in them, I'd be doing something called stratified systematic or stratified random sampling. Okay, so you can combine them to get a really representative idea, and that's great. Something else we might pick up is actually something that Amy Makel, I hope that's how you say your name, sorry. For one person on different days, you may feel different emotions. So that could be unreliable. And actually from that, then we might think, yeah, there are anomalies in this data. Well, that's true. So one, like Amy said, we should definitely have a good temporal sample. But also, actually, if most people say, I don't know, green, but you've just got one person who's giving a red answer over here, does that mean we should dismiss their point as an anomaly? Well, in this sort of data set, ideally not, because there are some interesting geographies behind that. What is the story behind that answer? Let's say, for example, that person was frustrated, say red 5, because of the parking situation. Well, that one piece of data or that element of the data would show someone at the council or people managing the tourism that there is an issue here that they need to consider and manage. So it's always worth exploring the geographies behind people's opinions. And the question here from Attlework Academy, he said, how do you tackle the issue of personal bias for emotion mapping? Well, from one point of view, that sort of answers that question, I hope, and that, actually it's not always a bias, it's what they feel. So to some extent, it's an objective assessment of what they're saying. It's going to be right. But equally, if you get a big enough sample, you should be able to overcome the bias. And if you've got a temporal and a spatial sample, that really takes account. It's all about the numbers. It really takes account of how opinions might vary on different days or across the space. Okay. Another good point there. Limitation from Claire Smith. Are people always in touch with their place emotions? Because emotion is coloured by many factors, and that is absolutely true. And again, if we could, on any one day, someone might be having, a hard time at work or something, and yeah, they might give you a more negative answer. So it wouldn't be a reliable representation of how the place makes them feel. But if you get a big enough sample, that should kind of even out that sort of eventuality. Okay, now we have one more exciting opportunity here. Although we've finished all of our methods, and hopefully you've got your pros and cons, your strengths and weaknesses down for each of those, and I hope you enjoyed them as well, sort of different approaches to collecting data. Yeah, we have a really exciting opportunity here to use something called Survey 123. And what we're going to try and do, is measure the emotion of our global community at this very strange time. Okay, Survey123 is an app that generates surveys with geolocated data, and that means it logs the location of the data point as you record it. Okay, so what we're hoping to do, although you can make loads of survey, well, any type of survey with Survey123, so it's a really good kind of tool to have in your toolkit to pick from when you're doing your own place studies. We've created a very simple survey here, just asking about your mood. Okay, so the mood and the strength. So the link to it should be up on screen now. You should see a sort of view of the Survey123 page. It's also at the back of your handouts, so don't worry too much about writing it down. Yeah, we're just going to spend a bit longer if that's okay with you. So it's time to come back to our questions. Now, hopefully, Chinese School and Holy Family Catholic School, you feel like I've answered your questions, because you asked quite technical questions about how we could make ethical considerations or consider the reliability and so on. So we've talked about that quite a lot. We've got other questions that are sort of about the place. So I thought it would be really nice to answer some of those. You can still submit them. I am still connected on Slack here. So if you want to, we now had 773 people submitting their Survey123. Thanks, guys. That's really good to keep involved. So a question from Mr. Bowden at St. Peter's School and his class. Is a sense of place much less relevant in the modern world compared to the times of John Constable? I thought this was such an interesting and insightful question. I can see why you might think this. In our kind of globalized world, we're so much better connected and we have much better information about everywhere, that maybe it seems like a sense of place matters less. However, I'd actually argue that it's more important and better developed. We are touched by and within so many more spheres of influence than we would have been back in the Georgian times, which is John Constable's time, because of this increased connectivity. And that means we are, creating a more informed sense of place for more locations, and that even extends to kind of imagined places or media places, so we don't even need to have been there. And also, we have a more in-depth sense of our own place as a result of this wider awareness and more information that we have about it. So actually the concept of place is much more substantial. As I think it was Doreen Massey said, instead of our places becoming more homogenized and kind of general because of all this globalization and all these connections, maybe actually they're just richer due to this multitude of little influences that are creating our places and influencing our sense of place. In contrast, I would say that Constable's time, that was the late 1700s to early 1800s, in case you don't know. Sense of place might actually have been sort of a non-concept. For some, only the richer people would have been able to travel very far. So their place was pretty much all they knew, likely to be much more sensitive to exogenous factors, other influences coming in. But yeah, essentially it would have maybe been much less a concept. That is my opinion. Also a much more technical question coming from, this is Loretto Grammar School and Ms. Craddock. Is collecting quantitative or qualitative data more useful when we're investigating place? Well, as we've seen, so many factors influence and are invested in our meaning that we attribute to place or a location. And we've seen the value today of considering, or today and in the pre-course, of considering all three of those approaches, the descriptive, social constructivist and phenomenological approaches. So I therefore consider a really good mix of data types to be crucial in investigating place, as long as you can justify their validity and the robust methods for getting good quality data. I'd say that was okay. And also, there's kind of a mix. An environmental quality assessment, for example, telling you about the quality of the environment, how that might influence your perception. That's kind of a quantitative measure, but it's subjective. It's your opinion of how nice the environment is. Whereas, if you did a place narrative or something, well, that's all qualitative data, but it's quite objective because you're observing things in the area. So yeah, a really good mix, essentially. Anything you can justify and that you think will give you valid data, that's what it's all about. Got a few other questions here. So I'm going to try and combine. So two groups have asked quite a similar question. From the Old Palace of John Whitgift School, they've suggested or asked, how much influence has the physical geography surrounding Dedham had in making Dedham a place? That's quite similar to how has Dedham's use of the River Stour changed over time since its original use of transportation of goods? And that's from Brighton Hove and Sussex Sixth Form College. So I'm going to try and group those together, it's okay, just so we can cover as much as possible. Well, essentially, this is a question about an endogenous factor, the river, and as a physical feature, and its influence on Dedham. Now, certainly it was important in the creation of wealth and making this area and other Stourside villages and towns really affluent and important to the region. There was an excellent connection between here, therefore, or Dedham, and down the River Stour to the markets of London via the ports of Harwich and Ipswich. And they're down at the coast just along. So since then, while that was really important in creating that initial wealth, since then, the beauty of that natural feature has really captured Constable's hearts. So obviously his depiction in loads of his paintings of the River Stour meant that that's really become part of the social construct of Constable country. So it still now forms really the basis of this tourist economy in the area, boating, nature connection, that sort of thing. So while it's now mainly maintained as a conservation feature in the AONB, actually it's had quite a considerable influence over time and still does in making this area, Constable country, what it is and the affluent place it is as well. Okay, shall we? I'm just going to consult my producers. Are we okay? Should I do another question? So just we've lost the time. Okay, so we have got time for another question. That's great. Question here from Jay at the Regis School. Do local people and visitors share the same perceptions of the area? How do you know? How can it be measured? Well, in short, I would say from my experience, no, they don't always share the same perceptions. Essentially, these two groups have very different experiences of the place, so it's shaping different perceptions. Some things they will share. So, for example, the importance of the aesthetic values. As I say, normally I'm going there every week and everyone references it's a pretty place, it's green, it's rural. Even your answers, and you haven't been there, reference that point. And it's considered positive. But I have also experienced various local views of issues caused by tourism, especially the parking. Lots of the services are quite expensive or tourist focused. And obviously that will affect some people more than others. So you'll get perceptions will vary by people. And visitors are much less likely to recognise that because they're only sort of there for a day, or it'll be less important in their perception maybe. Equally, things like access to the A12 is really valued by locals because they can use that to access Colchester, Chelmsford, London, Ipswich. So it's really important in terms of economic connectivity. You asked also, Jay, how do you measure this? Well, as long as your sampling is adequately representative, in fact, you could always stratify your population into visitors and locals and make sure you sample proportionally in each or equally in each. That should give you a good representation of how views vary between those two groups. And once you've got that in terms of, do you know that they're really, truly, significantly different opinions to each other? You could think about in your analysis, doing some statistical analysis of that data. And again, in the post-course webinar, you would be able to, your teachers will be able to access some ideas about how you might analyze this data, and that can be passed on to you. Okay, I don't think, sorry, just checking. No, we haven't had any other questions coming through on there. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me, guys, today. I hope you've really enjoyed exploring this challenging but vital part that place plays in our lives. So what would your next steps be? I'd like you to engage your geographers' brains, keep curious, and think about how you would follow up this investigation. And you'll get some pointers via your teachers from the post-course teacher webinars as well. But students or teachers, if you are interested, we have this guide. And this essentially goes through all the stages of the investigation process, gives you some ideas about how you might approach them. So that could be quite a useful thing to look up. Fieldwork.live, your go-to place for all this stuff. Now, we do have more to come on FSC Fieldwork Live 2020 from ages 7 to all the way up to 18. For the little ones, we've got habitat exploration coming up. There's a study on coastal management, which, although it's designed for GCSE, it would be really useful for Scottish hires, and also if you're moving from GCSE into A-level, great revision resource. And then at the end of the week, we also have a little study on hydrology and flooding. Okay, so that's focused again at the A-level end. So it would be great to have you join us for any of those. If you go to fieldwork.live, you can register for those. Also, these teacher webinars I've been mentioning, teachers, you can go to fieldwork.live and sign up to those. That will give you some more ideas and sort of share ideas among other teachers in discussion about how you might follow up this investigation. And finally, we'd love to hear your feedback on what you think of these sessions. So fieldwork.live is an evaluation form on there for you. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully, we'll see you again on either one of those live lessons, or maybe even at one of our beautiful FSC learning locations across the country. Thank you.